So welcome to the 2024 Security Planning webinar. I am Tom Ruffolo. I'm president of eSecurity Solutions. Every one of those bubbles has a meaning, which you will be finding out in a moment. So you understand where I'm coming from. I want to give a quick overview of my background. I've spent 20 years as CEO of eSecurity Solutions. We're a B2B cybersecurity solutions company. Companies focused on offering on one-stop cybersecurity solutions to small to medium and enterprises, but mostly small to medium-sized businesses. These solutions include compliance level risk assessments, managed security, and we resell products from the leading security vendors that you're all familiar with. So basically, we can provide to customers pretty much everything they need. I'm a certified information security auditor, so I actually have gotten some education in specifically in this area other than 20 years of experience. I have an MBA and computer science degree, so I'm generally technical. I developed a broad perspective of what's going on in security by working with a lot of these security vendors. So we hear from them all the time. We work with them directly, as well as a broad customer base. And the other thing is I'm also an advisor on one security company's board. I'm a security advisor for them as part of a reseller board. And so I do input to their strategy, and I do get to hear information from them about their product planning and where they're going, and also input to that process. So I'm actively involved in what's going on with the vendor community. Today's presentation, I'm going to cover the topics on the slide. So what I want to talk about is drivers of security and solutions. Now, this presentation is not designed to be down in the dirt. It's really supposed to be maybe 40,000 foot level. It is a presentation though on security, not on the implications of security or how you manage it if you're a CFO. It's really about what's going on in security. So I'm going to talk about the drivers, what's driving cybersecurity policies and strategies and solutions. So we're going to talk a little bit about top level drivers, top level challenges, and then what the typical company's goals are related to security, how that influences what they do as well. And then also solutions, starting with strategies, security solutions, talking about like the top level solutions, and then the top 6. And then where are companies lagging the most after you net all that out? By the time we get there, you're going to know the answer to that. Some of the top level security drivers for security in 2024 are these, right? So number one, small companies are not safer than large companies. And that's really been known for quite a while. Attacks are increasing. No company can afford, and no matter how big you are, small you are, to have employees down so they can't run, so then they can't use their computers, they can't access their data. You cannot afford lost customers because your systems aren't working or your data is corrupt. You can't afford to pay ransomware, and you can't necessarily afford the cost to restore your data, right? I mean, those are all things that no matter how small you are, I know that you may not be as focused on protecting your assets, but you can't really afford those kinds of impacts. There's a severe shortage of cybersecurity talent in the industry. That impacts companies' ability to hire and to retain experienced employees, and also to pay for the training that they need to go through, because every single security solution needs a lot of training, especially if you're talking about technical people, right? Trying to maintain a large 24/7 security group would also be very expensive. And in order, with today's security and what the requirements are for today's security, monitoring and managing needs to be 24/7. So it's just really not practical for small or mid-sized companies to staff that. Never has been. And I think most companies, if they're smart, have come to that conclusion, or they just don't do it and they ignore it. Several changes are driving cybersecurity complexity upward, which is a serious issue. AI is driving an increased number of attacks and solutions. Asset sprawl, when I'm talking about assets, I'm talking about servers and data and cloud applications and remote employees. Everything related to your company is migrating to the cloud. And so those are assets, and the moving to the cloud is causing a huge problem in terms of trying to protect them. It's no longer the same kind of situation it used to be. Compliance requirements are increasing over time. I'm just reading about NIST, the major security platform, is just coming out with a new standard, continually evolving to adjust to the increased threats and attacks, and coming up with new solutions that, or structure for how to solve these problems and provide appropriate security for any given company. Automated attacks enable almost anyone to attack almost anyone. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Security attack complexity is rising. And one of the attributes of that is multi-stage attacks. So attacks that get in, do something, and then evolve, and then do something else and do something with the goal to get to here, somewhere far in the distance, to maybe acquire certain data or access to something, may take multiple stages. That is the norm, not the exception. So now let's talk about specific security challenges. Specifically, some new attack methods are evolving now, and they're leveraging certain areas of weakness in companies, such as remote workers. The remote workers have changed the entire protection landscape. I'm going to talk more about that, quite a bit more about that as we go forward here. Secondly, the internet is providing access to almost everything, right? So if your assets are all in the cloud, including your employees and your data and your applications, and your servers are in Amazon Web Services and that sort of thing, it's all technically accessible through the web, right? So now the ability to protect that is much, much, much more difficult. So, sorry, I had to move something off the screen so I could see it. So the internet is a solution, and it's also a big part of the problem right now in terms of security. Supply chain holes exist. We've heard about supply chain attacks, like from, you might not have heard of some of these, but Home Depot, you probably heard about that. There's technology companies like Okta and SolarWinds that who's had supply chains. So we're talking about security companies or technology companies that are being attacked and impacting their customers and mostly their customers. So there's thinking about the supply chain and how that affects you is now a new thing that you have to be very concerned about. Some of these attacks are preventable, and some are very hard to prevent, such as if you download your software from somebody and from a company, you assume it's going to be to fix your problems and make your software better. But the reality is sometimes downloading software downloads malware or enables an attack on your system. It's not what you expect, and it is the world we live in today. If you look at administrator, so I'm talking about IT administrator errors and user or employee errors, it's another category of security vulnerabilities. The IT administrators are inherently trusted, but what if they allow access to your security or your IT, even accidentally? What if they configure your security improperly? That's a huge issue. And actually, it turns out configuration issues are, configuration errors are a big issue in security. So it's like, it doesn't matter how good your security is, if it's configured wrong, that's a seriously bad thing. Many attacks occur from both of those situations. Employees obviously are a major source of problems. They're frequently the subject of phishing attacks. Some of the top social attack methods include email, text, phone, and they're trying to get employees to accidentally provide access to company assets. Providing login credentials to an attacker or access to company data, bank accounts, or payroll are examples of typical social attacks. And it's impossible. Some of these are impossible to prevent, but multiple solutions do exist. So they need to be deployed to maximize your chance of preventing these kinds of problems, attacks. Small businesses are especially vulnerable to social attacks. and we'll talk about that in a minute. Next one would be siloed security. So if you think about security being in, if you buy endpoint security or firewalls or multi-factor authentication, you guys aren't involved in this on a daily basis, but there are hundreds of different types of security that can be purchased. There's probably at least 10 or 15 major categories of solutions. And if they're all siloed and they don't talk to each other, and they don't share information about threats, and they can't correlate and analyze that to do something about it, right, to prevent the attack or shut it down, then that is not an appropriate solution for today's world. And so the evolution of security is moving in that direction. But having a siloed security is actually a challenge. So we're solving these problems with various solutions. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the ability to prevent, monitor, and detect and respond. So monitoring and detecting and responding help to mitigate these problems, which are caused by siloed security, right, where the security isn't talking to each other. So monitoring and your key security and your IT are requirements in order to do that. We'll talk about that too. Democratize attack kits. So there are attack kits that are purchased on the internet by criminals. And so you don't have to be a very smart criminal, but you can buy an attack kit that enables automated attacks against a list of companies. This is a big reason why small businesses are not safe. There's no obstacle to attacking a large list of small companies. And attacks no longer need to be targeted and high cost. But there are attacks that are targeted and high cost, but they're focused at very high value targets. So the ones that you and I hear about the most, well, some of them, if they're high profile, are probably targeted attacks. But if you hear about it from a friend who's working in a smaller company, it's probably an automated attack that made it happen. Lastly, AI, right? AI is being deployed in cybersecurity for the last 5 years. So it's not, you may be thinking AI is new. AI is not new. And cybersecurity companies have been deploying it for a while, and they'll continue to develop it and deploy it and evolve it. But the bad news is the attack kits that I just talked about also can be AI enabled, and they can morph these attacks real time to achieve their goals. So if they go into your environment and they see that it needs to be a different type of attack, they can do that. And this is stuff that's going on right now. So one of the first major areas that I want to talk about is asset sprawl. We talked about that at the beginning, but it's causing major challenges that's going to be lasting for many, many years. Providing security for companies has never been harder. We've moved from centralized people, data, and servers and applications right within your headquarters generally to just the opposite, where you don't know where it is. I mean, of course, the IT people know where it is, but the result is not in one place. It's not even close to being in one place. We don't even have headquarters and remote offices anymore. We have headquarters, remote offices, and home offices. And we have the data and the servers and the applications all in different places. Our servers are moving to cloud infrastructures like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. The cloud providers have signed up to protect their infrastructure, but not your servers and your data. And that's the standard in the industry. So if you think that people moving to AWS is safe, it's not. And it's no more safe than if you protected it in your home, in your own office. In fact, it's less safe because it's now accessible via the internet. So while outsourcing servers may be easy, protection parts is more difficult than it used to be. Applications, right? So if you think about cloud applications, and we talk about cloud applications, we're talking about Salesforce and QuickBooks and Oracle and Office 365 and marketing apps, HR apps, payroll. All of these things have moved to the cloud. I'm using them all, and there's no way in heck I would ever try to bring these on site. And in fact, in most cases, you can't anymore. So you're forced to outsource everything into the cloud. The servers are in the cloud, your data's in the cloud, and The application companies are doing their best to protect their servers and your application, and your data. The reality is they're trying to protect your data too, but it's a daunting task. And even if they protect the data in terms of being attacked directly, are they really protecting and defining who accesses it and how they access it? Can they do that? And the answer is no, they can't. And it's not really their job. They might be able to provide you some of the tools to do it, but it's your company's job to make sure it's done. And then employees working from home, right? There's best case now, we're looking at maybe 35% of employees returning to work and working in the home in the headquarters offices or remote offices, but most of them are still working from home. And it's not a temporary thing. We know that now. We know there'll be some movement of whether it's 35% or 50% work in the office. We don't know, but the employees all have to access company servers, which are in the cloud frequently, Office 365, cloud applications, and they have to do it all over the internet. So then you have to ask the question, is the home infrastructure secure? And there's no way that your company is protecting the home infrastructure the same level they would at headquarters or even a remote office, right? It's just not going to happen. So there's inherent risk there. And there are methods to try to approximate that and increase that level of security, in which we'll talk about. But unless you do it, you should assume that your data and your employees are vulnerable. So more importantly, how do we protect the company from the employee? We're always talking about protecting the home office. The reality is what really companies are trying to do is protect the company from the employee. And if everybody's in the home office and the data's there, it's a lot easier to protect. But if the data's in the cloud and the employees, then you have to ask the question and be able to define who can access it, where can they store the data, who can what can they do to the data? Can they just read it? Can they modify it? Can they store it somewhere else? Can they store it to their local computer? How do we control that? Believe it or not, there's methods for doing all of that. But I would say that most companies, especially small and mid-sized companies, have not adopted those solutions yet. So they're huge holes. Top level challenges. Sorry about that. I meant to put that up. Top level challenges for all of these areas are visibility, right? What visibility level do IT and security staffs have on what's going on, right? Remember, it's all in the cloud now. It's remote. People working from home. Getting visibility on all that is a purposeful job, and it must be aggressively pursued, purposely pursued. And there are tools for doing all these things, of course, but unless companies adopt them, they're not going to be, taking advantage of it. So first, it starts with visibility. Secondly, access control. How do you control access and what people can do to the applications? So are we doing role-based usage control, like read, modify, edit, where they can save it? That is all available. Those tools are available, but they must be purposely and specifically defined and acquired. Data security, obviously malware, anti-malware solutions are important. Data backup and availability, super important as well. So some other security challenges. If you look at compliance, right, as a topic, regulation compliance, what you normally think about, talking about healthcare, merchants, government, defense, financial, public companies, education. Those all are regulated in some ways. And the interesting thing about regulations is most regulations are actually pretty similar. They all have the need to have security controls, like firewalls and endpoint security and multi-factor authentication. And then they also have a security management process that's required. So you have to manage the process for managing for how you manage the overall security, right? So like assessing risk, protecting, detecting, response, and then recovering. Those are all part of a process, and it's very, very, almost eerily, unbelievably similar between different regulations. They're very, very, very similar. So which is good, because if you're actually using sort of best practices security, you would be compliant with almost everything. The management process, the controls, we talked about the different types of controls, the process. Another area of concern would be cyber insurance, right? Cyber insurance is increasingly driving requirements for security. At one point we had like small businesses, ransomware woke everybody up, right? Compliance has woken people up. Cyber insurance is now waking companies up to being more secure. Initially the requirements for security were very basic for cyber insurance were very basic. And now they're moving very quickly toward requirements that are very similar to regulations. They're not necessarily there yet, but the direction's there. And when we talk to customers, many times they're using cyber insurance as a mechanism for moving them more toward a compliance level security, like adding security monitoring and detection and response. Anybody that's serious about security is doing that right now. So this is waking people up. Another area of wake-up call is your customers, right? If your customers or your partners, your suppliers require that you have higher levels of security, generally because they are required to have it, then that wakes you up, right? Requires a necessity to be compliant with HIPAA or NIST or something like that. They're pushing their requirements off on you, and now you have to adhere to the regulation requirements that they're required to. That generally requires things like a third-party risk assessment and filling in. You'd have to fill in identified security gaps that you get from the risk assessment. So these are gaps that I have. I have to then come up with solutions for that. And then lastly, which is the part that they're worried about, is they have to attest in writing to being compliant. So once you're, and of course, the legal team and the CEO and the CFO doesn't want to be responsible for signing something if he doesn't think they're actually doing it. So now it got serious, right? I'm required in writing to attest to being compliant. And this is, especially for HIPAA, but for other areas as well, is absolutely a fact and it's true right now. So where does all this lead? For many companies, frankly, the road is leading to compliance level security. This is an evolutionary thing, but it's a very fast evolution. Now, while this varies by company and size and circumstance, which it does, the need to elevate security is a trend that all companies really need to pay attention to. So let's see. So I think this is the last area of challenges, is basically the weakest link, right? And this is, if you'd like to discuss the fact that security is only as strong as your weakest link. It's been said a lot, and it's true for almost anything, right? But attackers either intentionally or accidentally find weakest link vulnerabilities in your company. If it's a targeted attack, it's very intentional, and they keep at it until they find it. If it's doing automated attacks, it might be accidental. It just happens to be the right message that resonates with the person, so they open the email and click on the link. But the weakest links will be found for one reason or another, and so we have to be very concerned about making sure that we've assessed where those exist and how to solve those problems. One of the areas where weakest links exist is supply chain attacks, and we talked about probably the most common one that we think about is software supply chain attacks, where you have a vendor and it's in the cloud and you're doing downloads to it. I mean, including Windows, right? Windows is always doing updates. The only way you know that the Windows update is not malicious or doesn't have something bad in it is nothing bad happens, or you didn't read about it in the news. But the reality is, for a lot of different types of software, it can be compromised on the vendor server or some other way in the programming, when the developer programming, that gets propagated, you download it, and it might take months before you even notice that this exists. How do you prevent that? That's a different question. But the fact that it exists, you need to do what you can to mitigate those kinds of attacks. And there are ways to do it, although supply chain attacks are notoriously difficult to prevent. but they can be detected, which is really where adding detection type software to your security to your solutions is so important now, because this is an area where you might not be able to protect it or prevent it from happening, but you should be able to detect it if you're monitoring the right things. Employees, right? Employees is obviously a super big weak link. Social engineering is typically used on them. Phishing, text messages, phone messages, CEO fraud, credential theft are often the results. Automated attack kits, democratized malware, if you will. We've now taken the ability to attack and brought it down to the bad guy masses, if you will, the people that, we've enabled almost any attacker to add their malware, if you will, their custom malware to an attack tool that can be automatically applied to small businesses as well as large businesses. So it doesn't matter if you're a large target, you can be a small target. Hackers are doing primarily targeted attacks. But if you do an appropriate security risk assessment, you can determine hopefully where your holes are and your weakest links are. And it's not something that the company itself is probably be able to diagnose themselves. Let's talk about company goals, right? This is another driver of security. At the end of the day, you can have all of these things that are in the environment. You can have attacks that are being prevalent. You can have all kinds of things. You might have high value assets. You might have glaring holes in your security. But if your company's security goals are not appropriate, you still could end up with the wrong answer, right? So for instance, if your company is focused on being compliant with regulations or potentially cyber insurance, let's say advanced cyber insurance requirements like compliance regulations, then and you're very purposeful and serious, which you would be in this case, then you're going to have the best security that you can afford, and that's all you can do. I mean, that's really what security is designed to be. It's like set up for, here's the rules, here's the infrastructure, here's the framework, apply it to your company, and do the best you can to meet these requirements, given that you're a small company or mid-sized company or large company. If you're a large company, you can buy everything. If you're a checkbox focused thing, so let's say you have a customer that's requiring you to be compliant, you might only be checkbox focused, and that's sort of good enough to have no penalties, but that won't get you the best level. That won't get you the best security. There's no way it will. But you have to understand what your goals are as a company. You could also have a philosophy that says, I don't want to be breached, right? So that's a pretty strong goal. So my company, I want good security, and I'm generally enlightened. My focus is on no adverse effects, right? That's a strong statement. But I don't care about audits, right? Because I'm not regulation. I don't have regulation that I have to comply with. I don't even have customers that are maybe mandating, but I'm enlightened. So I'm looking to come up with great security, no adverse effect. Well, that's not that far away from compliance level security. And it could be best practices focused. It could be, let's use a model of certain regulations. But either way, you're going to be applying some kind of a model to how you want to achieve that. And that's good. Then there's the sleep at night crowd. The sleep at night crowd, the goals vary heavily, right? So some are pretty practical and want pretty good security, but they don't really have any target for what they need. Decisions are driven by how they feel about what they need, and also with cost, right? So that's not the right focus to have. It doesn't get you the best results, but it's better than the next group, which is the delusionally safe group, if you will. They have no concept of what security is. The risks are not real. I just want to spend on the basics of security, maybe sort of the old security model, if you will. And these companies are not prepared for what might happen. This is blissfully ignorant And there's a lot of companies, especially small companies, that are in that group. And believe me, they are not secure in any way, shape, or form. So if you look at strategies, though, we've got, I came up with 6 strategies that I think are important. The first one is to define an optimized security roadmap. So if you're financially focused, you understand about planning, you understand about roadmaps, time-based things. The roadmap is the goal is to optimize the spend on the top priority solutions. It makes a lot of sense, right? We want to optimize how much we spend, and we want to make sure we spend it on the right things. So to do that, first of all, you really have to start with a third-party risk assessment. The assumption is companies can't do their own risk assessment, and smart companies don't want to, but they also don't think they could do it properly. So if you run into a company that says, I've already done my own security risk assessment, and it's usually pretty delusional, but it's certainly not what they probably should do. It's always good to have a third-party person look at it. If you bring your car into the shop, it's like that. I like to have an expert take a look at what I've got, not just me trying to figure out what that sound is. A security assessment will discover security gaps, and it will allow you to prioritize the solutions. It will provide a set of prioritized solutions. Now, these are generic solutions. The next step is to define the best security products and services or controls and the time frame to go implement that. Companies can't optimize the security unless they have a prioritized list of needs and gaps. They just can't do it. So what happens typically is companies will think that they know what they need. They'll overspend on certain things, and then they don't have enough money to do the stuff that they really need to add. So that's a bad outcome. So adding top-level security monitoring. Well, conceptually, this kind of makes sense, right? If you've got a bunch of security and maybe they're even talking to each other and trying to provide a better integrated solution, if you really think about it, you still want a monitoring solution that can look at all your security and all your IT and integrate all that information into one solution that correlates it and analyzes it and looks for threats that it wouldn't see if it just saw one thing happening, right? If you have a castle and somebody breaks into the front, you might go, well, it's just, an individual crazy person. But then somebody breaks into the back of the castle at the same time. You go, wait a minute, if I correlate this information, maybe I'm being attacked. And that's the kind of thing you can get with a top-level management solution. Normally they call it an MDR, monitoring, detection, and response is MDR. A managed SIM, or a security information and event monitoring solution, is the kind of solution that can do the top-level security monitoring. And most of the time it's managed because people can't afford to do or even have the experience to do this stuff themselves. But the tools exist to do this top-level monitoring. So that's an important thing. And anybody that's serious about compliance is doing this or acquiring it. I can tell you because I talk to a lot of companies. Outsourcing, right? Outsourcing to extend your security makes a lot of sense. And if you think about optimizing your security roadmap, the way you optimize it is you figure out what resources and what I need to do, how to prioritize it, and then I figure out what I want to do inside and what I want to do outside, right? So first of all, we already said it's hard to acquire resources. They're very expensive and they're hard to retain because it's just true. Security resources are very, very expensive. And if you want to try to do something 24/7 and you've got a bunch of complex security and you've got this top-level security monitoring, there's no way companies can do all that stuff themselves. I mean, enterprise, maybe, most of them no, and most of them don't do it. So, but small and mid-sized companies have no chance. And so they need to figure out what they want to outsource. The best to outsource the stuff that requires the most expertise, the most capability, 24/7. Yes, I want to outsource all that. The stuff we'll do internally is stuff that we need to do ourselves, and we want to do ourselves. Maybe it's even just validating, I mean, obviously, even if somebody's monitoring your security and telling you where you've got a threat or an attack, you still internally maybe need to do something to mitigate that attack internally, right? Or maybe you just want people to focus on the financial databases and the help desk and things like that. I mean, certainly a possibility. So the net result is better security and lower cost. It doesn't seem like it should be, but it is. And especially true for small and mid-sized companies. 1, 2, and 3. 4, invest in security that that addresses the new significant threats, like protecting assets in the cloud or asset sprawl, right? We talked a lot about asset sprawl already. And the solution that you need to address that are generally called cloud security or zero trust. And usually both are used almost interchangeably. Many companies offer that are focused on these types of solutions do both. And even if they don't do both, they probably say they do. So the cloud security and zero trust are designed to address asset sprawl and providing security around that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Second one would be picking your security vendors carefully. So if you look at the evolution of security companies, most of them had single products. They've evolved, many of them evolved to add multiple products. Many of them have fairly broad product lines. And I would say the goal today from security vendors is to provide a broad set of solutions that are integrated and talk to each other and provide higher level of security because of it. Now that's a journey. Most of them don't do that very well yet, but they have a name for it called XDR, and that stands for Extended Detection and Response. You don't have to remember that. It's just I figured you might want to know there's a name for it. If you actually do happen to be working with security vendors, the goal would be to pick a vendor that has a broad set of products and can address your needs, so they work with companies like yours or your size, right? So there's various companies out there, and some of them, and they all have their own personality. Personality is we have the best security, it's the most expensive, we target enterprise. Some of them are like, we're more small to mid-size, we want to make our stuff affordable, and I've got maybe a broad solution, maybe I don't have as broad of a solution product line, but you need to understand the personality of these companies and where they are and where they're going. And that would allow you to make good decisions. But I think it's very important to understand your vendors and whether they match your needs, short-term and long-term. Lastly, you need to combat social engineering. Social engineering attacks have been one of the most difficult and important attack methods applied, and they always will, right? Because we're attacking people, and people are social. And so if you trick people with emails and phishing attacks and fraudulent statements, then you can get them to do stuff they shouldn't. And so if you have like simple passwords and they give you the password, you're in. And that's why we don't want simple passwords, right? Because it's too easy to acquire that kind of information. Solutions like cyber training teach people how to deal with phishing, fraud, and how to identify attacks and how to avoid them. They're only going to do so much, but training is better than not training, and there's readily available solutions out there for that. Redundant email security. This sounds like a bad idea. It's actually a great idea. Having 2 email security solutions made by different companies that can filter your malware, look for bad links, look for phishing, look for CEO attacks. Those are good things. And nice thing about email is it's not real time anyway, right? So if it takes an extra 30 seconds for you to get an email, it probably isn't going to kill you. Access control is sort of job one for social engineering, because if they do steal your credentials, but you've got a multi-factor authentication and it's really good and really strong, maybe they can't get in anyway. So it doesn't matter. And so they're not going to steal your phone, which has your 2-factor authentication stuff on it. So let's talk about recommendations, right? So security solutions, these are 2 top-level statements to make about security strategy, or the solutions actually, right? So first one is the time for your company to move up to our next level of security, right? The old security model, the old core security model is, centralized assets, everything's in headquarters, it's local, I can control it, my people are in the office, It's, it may not be easy, but it's a lot easier to protect than what we've got right now. Anybody that's retaining that as a basic core model or hasn't spent to evolve their security here is probably missing the boat. And not probably, but definitely, right? I mean, that's there. You need to be evolving your security from the old model to the new model at the very least. And that implies adding cloud security, zero trust. How you do that, work with somebody that's an advisor that knows that and understands that and can advise you on what your company needs. Not every company needs everything. Not definitely does not need everything. And but most companies need some of this stuff. And the cool thing about security today is they've taken all of the stuff that used to work in the centralized environment and they've applied it to this distributed model where all the assets are in the cloud. And they found ways to protect all that stuff. So we need to be taking advantage of that. And but to ignore it is going to cause bad results at some point. Secondly, do we want to move from new core to compliance level security? I mean, I would say most companies that have assets to protect, that have a decent sized business, that do care about their business running and continuing seamlessly, should definitely be adding some compliance level security solutions. There's a lot of things you can do for compliance level security, but like top level security monitoring is something that we see companies that are getting serious about security are adding that very aggressively. Now, we're not seeing as many people focus on cloud zero trust, but there's some of that going on, and there's a bunch of different solutions in there, so maybe we're not always seeing it. But compliance level security is something that companies need to take a very serious look at. Okay, so now I've got 6 solutions, all right, specific solutions that we need to be looking at. And the good news is we're going to hit common themes that we've been talking about. So number 1, cloud security, right? We need cloud security to protect servers, cloud applications, cloud servers and data, cloud applications and data, employees, be protected from employees, and to protect ourselves from partners, or partners could be almost any kind of a partner. Not all companies need all the solutions. Many vendors sell solutions. Many vendors sell these solutions for some or all of these areas. Some sell some all, yeah. And these are all areas that discreetly need to be looked at by every company. There's no one solution that does all of that. So it's like, okay, I need some of this and some of this and some of this. And again, looking for weakest links. Zero trust. Zero trust is interesting because it's not a product, although some people say they have a zero trust product. It actually is a philosophy, right? And so the philosophy is assume by default no access for every digital asset. Basically, nobody can access it. Okay, that's really secure, right? Unfortunately, nothing can get done. So instead, what we do is you only specifically provide access granted for each individual application, data, user, service, and system. So it's specifically granted access for everything to everything talking to everything. So you can do groups of things. You can say, oh, these marketing groups, users can do this, people working from home in finance can do this, but you get very granular sort of control, if you will, where you define specifically what you can do opposed to defining what you can't do. And by definition, you say you can't do anything unless you have specific access granted. And specific roles would be defined to say what you can do. Can you view it? Can you modify it? Can you download it? Where can you store it? Those are all things that you can be very specifically defined. And that's very cool stuff, very important. And just understand it's a bunch of products, not one. So if you trust no one, obviously you can be very secure. And if you can specifically define what can talk to what, you've done the best you can to provide sort of zero trust. And until you get that level of protection, you really have some serious holes. That is a given. So solutions include for this, like multi-factor authentication is a solution. It doesn't do everything. It does some stuff. Something called zero trust network access, ZTNA, is generally a solution that provides some of that granular control. Things like whitelists, where you can only do certain things, you can only use certain apps, you can only have certain levels, certain connections. Those are kind of things that are designed to do kind of zero trust. Number two, personally, I don't have two A and B. Number two, choose your vendors wisely. We already talked about that. The reason you do that is you want vendors that have the right level of security for your company, the right product lines. You want to know whether or not you believe their story about how they're going to integrate their security and make it more secure over time, because they want to integrate the products and make them talk to each other. And then you need to know if you trust the vendor, right? Do you trust this vendor? If it's a cloud, let's say it's a cloud application solution provider like Salesforce, well, you should be able to protect it or to trust them, right? They're super big. They got a lot to lose if something goes wrong. If it's some smaller company that is brand new, you might seriously want to consider whether you should do that, even if they're more innovative than something that's not as innovative, just because it may not be as secure. Price point's a huge issue, right? Again, companies target enterprise, mid-level, and enterprise. They purposely target them. And so their pricing and their solutions mirror that. So if you really are trying to get more types of solutions in the box that in your budget, and you've already identified what you need to get the right price solutions with the right level of security and make all that fit. And time is an issue, but because you can do roadmaps, right? But you got to get the right combination of things. You don't overspend on one thing and then have no money left for something else. Implementing detect and respond solutions. This is basically monitoring, right? So you can protect with certain things, but the reality is protection alone is never foolproof. No way is even close. And so therefore, the focus today from security companies is more about detection and response. How do I detect what's gotten past my prevention security, which it will. And so, like we talked about, supply chain error attacks. The way you would detect the attack that was enabled by downloading somebody's software that had malicious code in it is you would have to have monitoring software that looks for indications of attack. And again, these solutions exist. Outsourcing, we talked about that. Use outsourcing to extend your security and your budget. Cyber resilience, we haven't talked about that, but security isn't just about protecting data, it's about high availability, and which basically means everything's running and it's available all the time. And there's a lot of things that cause that not to be available, right? You could lose the internet connection, so you need redundant internet. Data might not be available. It might be corrupted. It just might be offline. What if the power's off? Cloud applications are not available because this vendor's servers went down, or they got attacked by brute force attacks or something. Just all of these different things can cause lack of resilience, if you will. Backup disaster recovery systems need to be in place that are very, very strong. Offsite backup, offline backup, so they don't get attacked online. Believe me, it's a nightmare. A lot of stuff. The last one is compliance level solutions. Increase the focus on these so that you can comply with cyber insurance, customer requirements, regulations, and just generally leveling up your security so that you don't get breached. It needs to be what you're moving toward. So what I want to talk, just summarizing, so where are companies lagging the most? What are we seeing, especially for small to mid-size, right? Enterprises, are they enlightened or they're not? If they're not enlightened, then they're in big trouble, because they're probably going to get breached and something bad's going to happen. They're going to be in the news. But they can afford to provide the best level of security. They can do optimized security roadmaps. They can afford to fill all their weakest link and all this stuff, right? So first thing, though, that you need to do as a company, and where we're seeing perhaps the lagging the most, is optimized security planning, right? So many companies assume they know what they need. They come up with their own little plans and they ignore things, right? It's very easy to ignore things internally because nobody's telling you you're ignoring it. So if you don't use a third-party risk assessment or somebody, an advisor, to review what you've got and what you need and do it in an organized, methodical way, you probably don't know where your top gaps are. You haven't defined the solutions you need for that, and you haven't defined a security roadmap to implement that. It's really simple. It's very basic, but it's the only way you can get an optimized set of solutions where you have the most security for the least amount of money. It's just that simple. Second one would be failure to address the biggest vulnerabilities in security and the new biggest ones, right? And that would be clearly protecting your distributed assets in the cloud, your asset sprawl. We talked a lot about that. It's super obvious that this is causing big holes. If you look at it holistically and you add it all up, you go, my God, I can't believe how big that the holes are and how much of a risk that is, right? But if you don't think about it, it's like, oh well, my marketing people are off using their apps, and my finance guys are using my apps in the cloud. I'm not that worried about it, you know. But you start, if you're actually take a look at that and get visibility and get a catalog of everything that's being used by everybody, and then you figured out what's actually you even want them to use versus what they don't, you would be able to then you would know how big of a problem it might be, right? And the good news is there's solutions for giving you visibility and for protecting, especially access and access control. So super important stuff. Compliance level security, again, failure to move to that. Security monitoring, advanced access control, including things like zero trust, are important areas to increase security, but moving to compliance level. Also the weakest link, right? Protecting and detecting where the weakest links are and patching those holes. We definitely see, I would say every one of those is huge issues for small companies. Unbelievable how little some companies do in these areas and how blissful they are about it. So that's really the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for attending. I want to hope you learned something today. Feel free to communicate with me if you have any questions or anything I can help with. I have a blog, which I've listed here, that I do security articles. Also, this presentation in some form, edited slightly probably, will be up on the eSecurity Solutions YouTube channel within a day or so. So that will be available if anybody needs to see it or if you need to refer somebody to it.